So I'm delighted to be here today with Alan Newland, who has written this book, which I saw all over LinkedIn. Everyone was referring to it. And when I looked at the credits, I thought, I've got to get this book and see what's going on, because everyone who is anyone seems to think that it's absolutely awesome. And that's what I've found completely is describing the journey of becoming a teacher. So I'm so privileged to have Alan with me here today, because his wisdom and experience and ability to say things as they are shines through in this book. So I'm sure this is going to be a very interesting interview. Thank you so much for joining me, Alan.
It's a great pleasure, Rebecca. Thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here.
Can you just introduce yourself a little bit and tell viewers a bit about your life and your journey into writing this book?
Yeah, well, I started teaching a very long time ago in 1979. I turned up at a primary school in Hackney in East London. So I was a primary school teacher for about, in total, of over 20 years in schools in Hackney and Tottenham, both as a teacher and as a head teacher. In between, I had about 5 or 6 years as a teacher trainer at a university in London. And then after my headship around 2002, I went to the Department for Education, and then to a couple of years there, and then to a thing that they've now abolished called the General Teaching Council, which for teachers of my generation, they'll know, was the regulatory body for teaching for 10 years or so, where we dealt with cases of misconduct and incompetence. And that's where I got my interest in professional ethics and professional values, and this whole area that I've ended up writing a book about. Yeah. So.
Okay, and it makes it sound like you've been kind of out of the loop, but it's not at all, is it? The GTC,
yeah,
we're dealing with pretty much everything that could go wrong in education as cases came through to you.
Yeah.
That really shows in the stories in here, just wrestling with the boundaries of what's right and what's wrong in everything.
Yeah, well, of course, being at the GTC and dealing with the legal issues as well as ethical issues, and just reflecting on one's teaching past, what was very much the norm 30 or 40 years ago, changed rather dramatically. Well, yes, some things gradually, some things rather dramatically. And so values change, don't they? And that's something I talk about a lot in the talks that I do at universities and skits around the country. And actually, without sounding kind of old in the tooth or patronizing about it, I do find that trainees are very interested in how values change. And why they change and how they affect kind of professional attitudes and professional perceptions. So, I think I certainly didn't feel out of the loop, though, people do say, well, things change in schools, don't they? They change very quickly. On the one hand, yes, they do. On the other, they kind of stay the same. We've still got the same kind of system, haven't we? A teacher is basically in front of 30 kids pretty much most of the time. And even with all the technology and all the changing demands and changes that have been, particularly since the internet and what have you, that's still the basic relationship in education, isn't it? That a teacher, that kind of very intimate relationship that a teacher has with an individual pupil as well as with a class. And I often talk about that intimacy, that teachers do have a very intimate relationship with their pupils. They're trying to get inside their head. And what can be more intimate than that, really? You're trying to get inside somebody's head to find out what motivates them, what drives them, what turns them on, and what inspires them. So that's a very special kind of relationship, and it's one that I talk a lot about in the book.
And as you get close to children, they can be very challenging, just when you least expect it, in some quite predictable ways. And you bring it so clearly to life in the book when you talk about, what do you say when the teacher just walks up to you and say, "Sir, are you gay?"
Yeah, yeah. And actually, you know, I've had colleagues and friends who are secondary teachers, and you know, some of them have been gay, and they've said, well, you know, they want to talk to kids about that because they can see kids struggling with their own sexuality, and there's issues in school around that, and they've had a quiet word with them to kind of reassure them. And you know, I respect that. I do respect that, and I think as long as a teacher is motivated by the best intentions for the child, then, you know, that's something I respect. My general advice to trainees and to new teachers is, you know, you're going to be able to manage your career much easier if you keep your private life private. It's something I say again and again in the book: keep your private life private. And so I think you're teaching kids something when they ask you a personal question and you say to them, that's none of your business. That's a private matter. You're teaching kids about the boundaries there, aren't you? And so I don't think the teachers should ever think that they're going to ingratiate themselves, or and certainly not gain the respect of pupils just because they reveal aspects of their personal life to them. And so, you know, kids came to me once, I tell that story in the book. Mr. Newland, are you gay? You are, aren't you? You're gay. I said, mind your own business. That's none of your business. I might be, I might not. It's none of your business, you know. And they, oh, you are, aren't you? I said, I might be, I might not. But, you know, I just would not answer that question. And it was the same with other things. You know, sometimes during election time, they'd come and say, Mr. Newland, who are you going to vote for? I'd say, well, that's a private matter. Actually, it's secret. You know, we vote with a secret ballot, so nobody knows. I don't have to tell anybody. I do it secretly. And actually, you should know that because we do that in school council, don't we? When we vote for school council, nobody can bully you into voting for them. You can vote in secret. So you can, you know, you can turn these into little vignette lessons for the kids about what is private, what is public, what is personal, and what is professional. And they need to learn those boundaries as much as teachers do.
And that's what I found about your book. It addressed those kinds of challenges head on with really, really succinct advice and rich stories from your experience. So readable. It's very rare that I get a book that I just want to read about education, and it's like that. You just read it.
Well, that's very kind of you, and I'm very glad it has, you know, it has that feel. I I try not to be judgmental. I try not to be, you know, giving people advice. As I say, perhaps the only piece of advice I give people in the book is keep your private life private. You can take it or leave it. You don't have to. But the more that you reveal about yourself and your personal life, the more you're revealing about your personal values and actually the kind of moral values within them. Now, people can judge those values, and they're entitled to judge them because they've got their own moral stance, and you've actually revealed your morality to them. So they're going to judge it, and they may judge it in ways that actually disappoint you, or they may judge it in ways that are disapproving. But you've given them the opportunity to do that, and so you can't complain now. And I separate that from this legal and ethical category, because teachers have legal responsibilities and authorities given to them because they are special. Society invests in them, you know, a special kind of status because they've got qualifications and responsibilities and accountabilities and skills and knowledge that not everybody has. That's why they've got some legal powers and legal authorities. And as a community, as a profession, we've got ethical codes, and not everybody has those. But everybody has moral viewpoints and moral perspectives. So I try to kind of take people through those three categories and to test themselves by it. When they get challenges, just to think of, whether it's a legal, ethical, or a moral issue. And again, I tell a story in the book about a trainee who came down from the lecture theatre once. In fact, this has happened a couple of times, interestingly. I don't know whether lingerie modeling is something that a lot of teachers do, but this young woman came down after one of my lectures and she said, could I have a quiet word? And I said, yes. She said, well, I've been lingerie modeling for the last few years, and I've earned quite a bit of money. It's helped pay my way through university and through my PGCE. And now my tutor has said, when I start my new job, I'm going to have to give it up, and I don't really want to. What's your view on that? And I said, well, I was just talking in the lecture about legal, ethical, moral. Is it legal to model lingerie? And she said, yes. I said, if you don't mind me asking, are we talking about soft porn here? Or she said, no, it's a top brand lingerie brand. It's a big website. And I said, okay, so is it legal? She said, yes. I said, okay, is it ethical? And she's, well, it doesn't interfere with my work. It's never interfered with my planning or preparation. I do it at the weekend. So, if I was playing, it only takes the same time as if I was playing rugby or hockey or something. I said, okay, so it won't interfere with your job. She said, no. I said, okay, so there's no ethical implications. I said, is it moral? And she said, well, to me it is. And I said, there's the point. To you, it's moral. It's a moral activity. It's not immoral. But to some people here and there, they might think it is. So are you prepared to face them down and stand up for your particular moral position? She said, yeah. I said, then I'm sure you're going to be a fantastic teacher. And I said, one more thing. The kids might discover the website, parents might. They might come in with snidey jokes, or they may even complain, go and tell your head that this is what you do, see what your head says. And hopefully the head will be supportive. If they're not supportive, ultimately you might need to find a school where your moral stance marries with the school's moral stance. But be confident that what you're doing is not illegal and it's not unethical. And so your morality and other people's morality is their own business, and it doesn't impact upon your work as a teacher. So that's a quite helpful categorization when people meet challenges such as this.
Yeah, thank you for taking us through that in such a vivid way that really makes sense of it. So it's legal, ethical, moral.
Yeah.
And then when you've thought about moral, you have to think about your head teacher and the people who might have to defend you and how all this is going to work in practice as well.
Yeah. But I think, be ready to defend that. Don't abdicate it. Don't concede it too easily. You don't have to make an issue of everything, but there are times, we haven't got a problem recruiting teachers anymore, really. I mean, there's occasional problems, but it's not like the 80s and 90s where you couldn't recruit teachers for love nor money. Teaching is one of the top graduate recruitment areas now. The problem is retaining them. And at the GTC, we used to do exit surveys of why people were leaving. And they used to regularly say, it's all too much. It's not just the workload, it's the expectation. And, the kind of imposition and the intrusion on my life. I never feel my life is my own. And so teachers must be prepared to defend their lifestyle if it's got no ethical or legal implications. And again, another quick story, I was a young man at the time, I was still single, but nevertheless, I was out celebrating with some friends, and I was in a pub a mile or two away from the school, and it was a Saturday night. And I must admit, you know, with my friends, had a lot to drink. It was a celebration. And a father challenged me on it on the Monday morning and said, you know, he said to me, you know, are you going to teach the kids to behave when you get that drunk in a pub? And at that point I thought, hang on. And I said to the, you know, parent very respectfully, look, what you saw on Saturday night was my private life. You know, I've never advocated drinking alcohol with your child. Your child has never seen me drink alcohol or seen me drunk. What you saw on Saturday was my private life, and with respect, that's none of your business. And sometimes parents need that lesson too. Do you know what I mean? So we've got to be prepared to defend things that we wouldn't apologize for if we weren't teachers. Don't think that because we're teachers, we suddenly have to live these lives of being saints or, you know, angels. Society has no right to expect that. Yeah. What they do have a right to expect is that we are role models. Yeah. But they don't have a right to expect that we're angels. Yeah.
You give lots of other really vibrant and relevant examples of these kinds of dilemmas and suggestions as to how we might navigate those boundaries, you know, who's caught speeding and this and so on. One topic that you addressed head on was physical contact with children. I found that absolutely compelling because one really disturbing memory in my career was actually, you say, it was in the early 2010s that we got specific guidance, but I remember it being a bit earlier than that, and guidance coming out that it is okay to have physical contact with children in certain circumstances. If you're restraining a child, it's all right. And I'd had that guidance and I'd seen the videos, and I was in a situation where one child was very violently attacking another child. And I decided to intervene to pull that child off. Yeah. Because I was really concerned about the damage they were doing. And that was something I felt strong enough and confident enough to do with the advice I was given. Yeah. And I found your advice absolutely brilliant. The key problem I had was another teacher rushed over and shouted at me to get off. Yeah. And not to touch the child. Quite wrong. Your advice that teacher was wrong and I was essentially right was so helpful just to see it written there. But you also gave really clear advice whenever you are going to have physical contact with a child to warn them, if it's appropriate to request to check whether they've done it, but in this fight situation to say, this needs to stop or I am going to intervene. Yeah. If you don't want me to touch you and pull you off, stop. And
stop what you're doing. Yeah.
And then as you intervene, to tell them what you're doing and why. So I am pulling you off because you are hurting this child. Yeah. And as soon as it's finished, to tell them what you've just done. So there's no question as to what just happened and why. And that's just brilliant advice. I've never heard that advice before in all my time in teaching, and it was so cathartic to read it so clearly.
Yeah. Well, you know, as I say in the book, actually, that advice is as old as the British Army. You know, it's the kind of you know, it's the advice they give not just to officers but to NCOs about tell them what you're going to do it, and then tell them what you've just done. And that's very helpful, not only in helping you feel reassured about the justification for what you've done. So in a personal sense, that kind of is quite reassuring. But what I try to give in the book there is the kind of legal authority and the legal powers that teachers actually have by statute. And of course, the fundamental one, I mean, forget all about the stuff about the use of reasonable force and restraint and restraint training and all of that. The fundamental role of a teacher is to apply a duty of care. And as a teacher is to obviously apply first and foremost an educational duty of care. But we all know, particularly in the British culture of education that we see our role as much wider than that, as applying a duty of care physically, emotionally, socially. These days we're concerned with children's mental health. It's much more than just the education. So the fundamental duty is to apply a duty of care. And if you're allowing a child to get beaten up by another, you're not applying a duty of care to either of them. And you're certainly not applying it to the child who is on the receiving end of a beating. And so, yeah, if my child came home with bruises and scratches, and I said, "What happened?" Mandy beat me up. She started a fight with me and beat me up. "What did your teacher do?" "Oh, she said she wasn't restraint trained, so she couldn't intervene." Well, as a parent, you'd be going down to the school wanting to know why that teacher had failed in their duty of care towards your child. And so there's the fundamental. Think about, what would responsible parents do? That old phrase, which is a legal phrase, in loco parentis, in place of the parent. If young teachers, new teachers, think of that role of how responsible parents would behave, then it's hard to conceive of a situation where they would go wrong. And that includes all this stuff about physical contact. My great regret about the last 10, probably 20 years now, Rebecca, is that particularly since the case of Victoria Columbier in 2002, the whole, we looked again at the whole safeguarding thing and the working between agencies, and this is where the phrase safeguarding really kind of came in, and the whole things were reviewed. And what happened was that in not just teachers, but the police, social workers, medical profession, everybody were, top of their agenda was safeguarding, making people safe. And that was very true in schools with teachers. And of course, what got relegated was this equally urgent notion to apply a duty of care, not just to safeguard children from harm, but to apply a duty of care, which is going to involve physical contact, to demonstrate things, to model things, to do your job as a teacher, as well as to apply first aid, or to hold children's hands when crossing the road, or taking them into the assembly, or the myriad ways in which teachers and children are normally going to come into regular physical contact with each other. And what's happened in the last 10, 15 years is that the fear about getting that wrong has undermined the confidence of teachers, and particularly men. Men are terrified about physical contact, both in primary and in secondary. And that's probably contributing to the reason why the teaching profession is still so very, very top heavy. 72% overall are female, 90-odd% in primary schools are female. And that seems to me to be a kind of scandal, that boys could probably go through, not boys and girls could go through their whole primary career without ever meeting a male teacher. And that seems to me to be wrong. But it contributes.
I'm really glad you've gone down this route, because it's an issue I'm struggling with myself at the minute as a woman. I'm in primary schools and nurseries on supply most of the time just now. And I find if you're working in a nursery where the children are in from 8 till 6,
yeah,
it's part of the day that you just pick up a child who's in distress and you've got them on their shoulder. And this is like 3-4-year-olds. I'm not working with children any younger. And often a child who is clearly neurodivergent and hasn't yet been assessed and so on, but is clearly totally overwhelmed by the experience of being in that nursery. If you just pick them up and carry them, they relax, they're completely comfortable, they feel secure.
Yeah.
When it gets to a break time, they're going to be able to sit in a chair and take their food like other children.
Yeah.
But that physical contact
Yes.
makes the difference between their life in nursery being possible and not.
Yeah.
Now, as I've gone into day nurseries and schools in reception classes, when I say a day nursery, I mean like a community nursery where children are just in for a few hours.
Yeah.
It's age 3 to 4, or a reception class in a school where children are in quite short hours. I found myself in essentially the same situation with a neurodivergent child who is totally overstimulated, exhausted, overwhelmed, and I want to just pick them up and carry them. I'm often in as a teaching assistant, and she can't. And the energy and work and skill involved in working around that takes so much teacher time. You've got these incredibly highly skilled teachers who know these children, but it takes them 10 minutes to talk a child into doing something just because that child's exhausted. And
you know, I think this is a story I didn't tell in the book. I can't remember, but one of my sessions a couple of years ago was at Leicester University, actually, and there was somebody training on a PGC course. She'd actually worked in the school for about 3 or 4 years as a teaching assistant. We were talking about this, and she said, you know, it reminds me of a story. We had a staff meeting where we were reviewing the physical contact policy. And we had one of these, minimize physical contact. And after 2 years, we reviewed it. And she said, the most senior teacher in the school, the most longstanding teacher in the school, burst into tears. And she said, I hate working in this school now, because for the last 2 years, the only time I have been allowed to touch children is when I'm restraining them. And I used to cuddle distressed children before, and I used to, comfort kids and show praise and congratulation by giving them a hug or a pat on the back. And she said, and all that's gone. And now I hate doing this job. And of course, that's completely unnecessary. And I think that's where we make a mistake with these policies that go a little bit too far and they're too cautious. And they're doing it for well-intentioned reasons, because they want to protect teachers from, allegations of inappropriate contact. But in fact, all it's doing, in my view, it's doing more of undermining their confidence and their skills around children. And it's not just primary teachers either, it's secondary teachers. I tell you what I find reassuring very quickly is watching anybody training to be a teacher or a new teacher should go to Channel 4's archive, 4OD, Channel 4 On Demand, because all those series about, teaching in Yorkshire and Essex and the East End, those great series they did about the schools in those places, where there are hidden cameras all over the place. And secondary trainees and teachers have said to me, oh, well, yes, in primary, you could always touch kids and cuddle kids. You can't do that in secondary. And actually, those programs are littered with examples of where secondary age kids are distressed or, upset about things, or they've got angry or what have you. And they've had a pat on the back, or they've had a brief little cuddle or what have you, or they've had some reassuring physical contact. And so, when teachers are focused on that fundamental role of applying a duty of care and doing what is reasonable in the circumstances, that's what the law says, do what is reasonable in the circumstances to promote the well-being of a child, then actually you're fulfilling your duty of care. And that should guide our confidence around children, not a fear that there may be an inappropriate allegation, which is the number of those allegations is so infinitesimally small in a population size that we have, that we are exaggerating this problem really far too much, and it does nothing except undermine confidence.
I found your book helpful because it made me realize that the boundaries that schools and these nurseries that I'm working with are establishing could be otherwise.
Yeah.
and it's their policies that you have no physical contact.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if I was working in these places longer term, I could maybe challenge that gently.
That's right.
And just nudge it a little bit, because
Yeah.
I watch these teachers who talk the children around, and they're hugely highly skilled, and what they're doing is amazing.
Yeah.
And that should definitely be best practice. But it should also be
Yeah.
acknowledged that sometimes there isn't time to do that.
Yeah,
Sometimes
that's right.
the teaching assistant might not have that skill set.
Yeah.
And if the physical contact clearly works,
Yeah.
it's actually okay.
Yeah.
Especially if it's in public, so other people can see you.
Yeah.
And you're not.
Yeah, and I mean, I will say to trainees, new teachers, look, if you're working in a school that has no physical contact policy, you've got to work with that. Don't undermine it. That's an unprofessional thing to do in itself. But when you get to in a position where you can be influential, in staff meetings or review meetings or what have you, state your case. And when you get to be a deputy head or a head, you can be much more influential on these policies. But don't work against school policies. You'll have to work with them.
So just to come back to the book as it is, Becoming a Teacher, in the index, it's sectioned into the teacher and the law, the teacher and ethics, the teacher and morality, just in that framework that you've taken us through. It's littered with stories and with real life examples and with really just such concise advice. It gets more complicated as it goes on, because the law is so crystal clear, and that's where you're that incredibly lucid. And then, of course, these other issues of morality, and they're just more complex. But I still thought it read absolutely brilliantly. I mean, most education books that I'm reading, I'm quite critical of front to cover. And I really only found one page that I was, I thought I thought could be better. And that was your analysis of politics and education.
All right, okay. Go on, say more.
I've been living it inside out. I'm trying to remember what it was. It was around about page 124 or something like that. And you were I think you were stereotyping the left and the right too much.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know if you know, but I've been a politician for the last.
Oh, no, I didn't know that. Right, okay.
I worked during the coalition really hard to reintroduce the use of evidence in policy making.
Okay.
Challenge the lack
Good
of
for you. Yeah.
So really, for me, the big battle in politics since 2010 has been about connecting policy to evidence or not. And it's such a long way from these big battles of the 20th century, really.
Right. Yeah.
So looking at, my passion was always about how you have wise policy making and good politics.
Yeah.
And in the 21st century, we have all these free discussion forums and new ways of communicating with each other. So I was fascinated by what was becoming possible in terms of connecting the people on the front line to the policy decisions that were being made.
Yeah.
And until 2010, that was really interesting and developing extremely quickly. And then it just stopped completely. And my specialism is maths education, and that's the most dramatic area where it stopped. And suddenly we had a curriculum that was younger than anywhere else in the world, and exams for 6-year-olds with no apparatus.
Yeah.
And the forcing of rote learning of maths and back to Victorian strategies and so on.
Yeah.
So I battled with that for many years, and I just don't recognise these battles of the left and the right in that anymore. For me, it's a battle between evidence and non-evidence. And a lot of politicians and the connections I've made across all parties are doing the same thing.
They are, and that's interesting. I think I know. I can identify a few bits in the book. I think that you might take issue with, but one of the examples I give. I mean, first of all, in terms of evidence, I think while you can make a very strong, rational case for evidence-based policy making, and particularly in education, what's the evidence that this works? What's the evidence that synthetic phonics is actually the most, not only the most effective way for children to learn to read, but actually turns them into lifelong readers and lovers of literature? Now, there's an example I gave in the book about when I was a young teacher. There was an ideological battleground between those people who taught reading through phonics and reading schemes and those who taught reading through, what we called emergent literacy, the real books approach. Now, the remnants of that are still around now, but there's a good example where I think whether you were on, that kind of, that side that believed in emergent reading and real books approach, you could summon the evidence to say this works. You could go to, the famous names that I thought of, people like Frank Smith and all these people doing research about real books and Margaret Meek and all of those, and you could present the evidence that it works. And I was one of those ideological people who absolutely, put the flag in the ground and stood by it. And then one day I went to visit a school in Luton, just by chance actually, but it was a work trip, but just by chance, this school was absolutely sold from start to finish on reading schemes. And every kid in that, and it was in a working class part of Luton, and every kid in that school not only could read fluently, but they loved books. And this completely shook my foundation from an empirical, not a rational point, but from an empirical point about what was working. No doubt that head teacher could summon the evidence that, reading schemes and phonics was more effective. But actually, from an empirical point of view, from what I could see, these children loved books and loved reading. So it made me think, okay, this whole left-right ideological pragmatic division, or the kind of rational versus empirical. Sometimes there's an area in between that really needs more exploration and more acceptance. And I think that's very true in education. The more ideological we get, the worse job we do.
So when you have polarized battles going on, both are evidence-based because both are supported by teachers who have experienced them working.
Yes, yeah.
That's normal and it's healthy. And I still see a lot of this going on in many areas of the world. And people think it's bad, but it's not. It's healthy. But to make it healthy, what you need is experts in education, people who've worked in academia, done the research, talked to people with different perspectives for a long time, who understand why both perspectives exist, understand the contexts in which each tends to thrive, understand that each have their rationale, their evidence, and their validity, understand that in some settings one is best, in some settings the other is best, in many settings a healthy combination of both is wise. And so when people have very strong views, as you did as a young ideologue, you meet these people and they calm you down because you know there is wisdom there beyond you and a journey to take, and that those people are connected into the policy making. And that went completely. And at the same time, I mean, until 2010, in the 21st century, we were developing co-production, which is a new way of collectively thinking, where those experts are much more connected to everyone on the front line, and there's a greater discussion. And as a politician, I've actually spent a lot of time over the last 10 years working in health rather than education, because it's been going on there. And all these new ways of discussing everything proactively together with the people with different experiences on the front line, and the managers and the experts and the researchers all sitting together before decisions are made and puzzling them out together, listening to each other's evidence before those decisions are made, trying to feed into policy development. It's been going on in health, and it has not been going on in education.
Yeah.
So the battleground has shifted between the battles of the left and the right, which still exist,
yeah.
but are even more toxic because those people who deeply understand them don't exist. They've been taken out. Apart from, I'm finding, in the Chartered College of Teaching, where there's a real resource, and in little pools that is still in higher education, but used to be vibrant, used to be connected society through it. You'd find these people everywhere.
Yeah.
Everything would be proactively consulted, and if you went to the consultations, you'd meet these people.
Yeah, I think for I agree with what you're saying, but I think for people who are reflective and thoughtful, they will be open-minded to meeting people who challenge their assumptions and challenge their views. But there's at least as many people who need to have their sometimes ill-informed views bolstered in an echo chamber. And we see that kind of behavior on the internet, in social media, don't we? That you know, we have people, you follow people that you know are going to agree with you, or you follow people that you agree with. And I think that's true with things like the teaching of reading when in the 1980s and 1990s. If people challenged my view on that, I stopped listening to them. And I'm ashamed to say that now. I just was not in the reflective, engaged mode that I later came to be. So although the process will happen to everybody who's open to it, I think with some people, and I was one of them, the process was slower than with perhaps people like you, who are much more open-minded and intellectual about those things.
I think I was just lucky because in the maths community, there were conferences where you could meet these people and just sit down and have lunch with them. And I was doing that from the moment I qualified as a teacher. So it was just the way that was operating. So the contrast was so dramatic as to what they're
And I think the teaching profession is much more open to that these days. I think the teaching profession is much more professional than it was when I entered teaching. So it's much more a community of shared values, with those values being objectified to the extent that we can look at them and say, are these the fundamental values are these the values that we want reflected in the work we do? I think there was very, very little of that when in the late 70s and 80s, though it was a very, it was very highly, lots of things about education were highly contested, but I think there was very little of this sense of what makes us a professional group and what's the characteristics of it.
In some of the communities on Facebook, like the primary head teachers community, it's astonishing the way in which that's going on, and people can just talk to each other and share those values, and they do identify with each other really clearly. So of course that was never possible before, and that's really a whole country and more coming together as head teachers, and that's just wow. So there is that, and there is the Chartered College of Teaching, but there's then a gap between that and what's happening in terms of policy that didn't exist before. There were bad policies, they'd always come from somewhere. You could see, well, maybe not, maybe it's been bad before, thinking about it.
Well, I'm much older than you, so I saw some of those things going on even before your time, but you're right.
Well, I grew up in the 80s, and I went to one of the worst schools in Britain, which had fallen apart because of the policy of subsidized private school places, and suddenly all the middle class parents and communities had gone from this school that I was at, and it imploded. And at the age of 10, I thought it was perfectly normal for kids to be stamping on your chest and spitting in your face at break, and you're just having to hide. So I saw some of those from a slightly different perspective. Your target audience. So there's three really, well, if you think in three categories, people who are thinking about being a teacher and training as being a teacher, people are experienced teachers, and the I to T market, that people are running teacher training.
Yeah.
Who did you have in mind?
Well, I would say that I wrote it because, well, for quite a few years now, since the GTC finished, I continued going around the country. In fact, actually, when the GTC finished, universities and skits invited me to go and say, you know, can you come and continue these talks about ethics and professionalism? And so it became a kind of career in itself. And I was always talking to trainee teachers and their tutors and lecturers. And so when I came to think, well, I think it's time now to write a book, because I won't be doing this. I won't be continue doing this, going around the country forever. I mean, sometimes it's quite hard work. In the end of term and the beginning of term, universities and skits, they all, you know, they want them either at the end of the course or the beginning. And so I'm in Newcastle one day, Plymouth the next, Liverpool, you know, by the end of the week, I'm pretty wrecked. But I just thought, let's get all this down in a book. And so my principal target was these trainee teachers, new teachers, now called early career teachers and NQTs. But what's been really nice, as you alluded to, with the reviews that I got from people who read the manuscript, and these were trainee teachers, new teachers, early career teachers, tutors and lecturers from skits and universities, and from some experienced teachers. They all said, this is a book for everybody, Alan. You know, this is not just for new teachers. This is a book for everybody. So that was very reassuring, that it really is a book for everybody to reflect about teaching and to get some tools about guiding yourself through this professional persona where there are going to be challenges. But principally, I'm aiming it at new teachers who are coming in thinking about this thing from afresh, and to their tutors and lecturers who are guiding them through it. So that's why there's so many exercises, discuss and reflect on this, and you know, think about that, where I ask them to stop and think and discuss these questions that are really punctuated throughout the book. Yeah.
I think reading the reviews, new teachers reading it, people who are just doing their teacher training, they are loving it. I loved it after all these years. I've learned so much from it.
Right.
Just in terms of the initial teacher training, have you married it up at all with the core content framework?
Well, yeah, because not only that, you know, I mean, the thing about the stuff in the teacher standards and the core content framework and the new early career framework is that in terms of the things that I'm addressing, it's actually relatively unspecific, isn't it? It talks about professional behaviors, and you know, the thing in the stuff in the teacher standard says, you know, not undermining fundamental British values or upholding public trust. And they have to be very general, because the more specific you are, the more you're taking away people's agency for their own professionalism. So that's why I've got so many stories, and that's why so many of them put the reader in a gray area where I'm not telling them what to think and what to do, but they're using these kind of categories of legal, ethical, moral from their own understanding and experience to apply to the situation that they'll find. And I think it may have been included in one of the quotes, but one of the PGCE students who read it said, he said, I really enjoyed reading it. And that incident where the father came in and started beating his child in front of you, you didn't stop the description and say, obviously this was wrong and he shouldn't have done it. You took the reader through that incident, and you kind of give them the tools to analyze it for themselves and make up their own mind about how and what they would do in response to it. And so that's exactly what I'm trying to do in the book, not be prescriptive, not be judgmental, not be long in the tooth about we did it this day in the old day, not at all, but just to give people confidence and hopefully inspiration that teaching really is. I really believe this. I think teaching really is the most fundamental of fundamental professions.
Yeah,
So,
it's embedded in everything. It's embedded in being human, isn't it?
Yeah.
But what you said about aiming to get people to think rather than tell them what to think, it really does do that. It's brilliantly, fluently structured to do that.
Good. I'm glad you found that, Rebecca. I'm very, very pleased that you found that.
Now, as we bring this to a close, I just wanted to look at this chapter 6 here in the index. Becoming a teacher of character.
Yeah.
Now, I read that with the interpretation that chapter was about, well, now you've got the basics of teaching. How do you become a teacher of character with a character that children will remember? Yeah. And it's not that at all. It's about teaching children to have character, moral, ethical, fundamental character traits of children. And it's brilliantly done, and we don't talk about that very much. But
okay, well, I'm glad you think that. I mean, here's one of the great things about putting out your manuscript to people and asking them what they think about it, because I had 2 or 3 people say, I think it needs a final chapter, Alan. It needs something about, what you're talking about here is how you're bringing out the character of teachers, or how you're bringing out the character of children. And I thought, okay, right. And so I then went back and spent a month or 2 writing that last chapter about, becoming a teacher of character. And I wanted to have that dual meaning of teaching is a character building process and profession. But it's also, what is special about teaching as a profession? Well, you are passing over not just skills and knowledge, but you're passing over society's fundamental values. And the way that you will enable children to take on those values is through character building experiences. And acknowledging that something like adversity is to be welcomed. It's not to be avoided. It's not to be ironed out or engineered out of experience. It's actually to be built into experiences, because it does build character and confidence. So it's both from all of these stories I tell is both about how teachers build their own character through the experiences of challenge, but also about having an understanding of what character building is in children. And the things that I emphasize in the appendices, which again can be used in a variety of ways, is I talk about the spiritual, moral, social, cultural education, but the civic values that teachers are authorized to promote with children. And I talk about, I talk positively about fundamental British values. I think there's no point in contesting that as a phrase or as an issue all the time, because actually some people do hold that, and teachers have to work with it. It's there in the teacher standards. So let's try and understand this in a way that I think teachers can use. So yeah, it's very much both from how teachers see themselves and how they teach, not just their subject of maths or physics or history or what have you, but their role as a model in society. Why should parents trust you with their children? And they do that not just because you'll be a fantastic maths teacher, but they do it because they'll trust you to build their character. And that's what teachers are about, in the way that no other profession is. I don't go to the doctor to build my character. I don't go to a lawyer to build my character. but I send my child to a teacher to do that. I do it, you know, I will do it as a parent. Parents do it, but teachers have a really fundamental role in society to do that as well.
And it is a really beautiful chapter in its own right that I would recommend to people, because just to have that time and space to think about how we're developing children's characters is very lovely.
Great. Well, I'm very, very glad you enjoyed it. That's great to know.
The flip side to that is that as a teacher, you want to take your own life journey too, and it doesn't cover that, but that's okay, because this is a book about being a teacher of children.
Yeah.
And it gives you some space as a human being to push back and create your own space to be yourself, but it doesn't talk about your life journey. And the other big book for me of this summer actually covers that, and that's the one I'm working on now. Have you seen this one at all? This is the other one that's been huge on LinkedIn.
No.
People recommending.
Wow.
Cultures of Staff, Wellbeing and Mental Health. I'm busy plowing my way through this one, and I'm hopefully doing an interview in a week or so with the author, who's Steve Waters, who's been running staff wellbeing training in schools. So that's going to give me a chance to talk about that separate topic, about the journeys that teachers take as human beings, and allowing them to take those journeys and to thrive in their own right as they are teachers.
Yeah. So
it's a really nice, I think there's my two books of the summer.
Great.
Complement each other beautifully. But your book only has 6 chapters, which is fabulous, and lots of it has been pushed into the appendices, which I think was a great, I don't know if that was an editorial suggestion, but it works really well for someone who wants to just read it. Whereas this one has 39 chapters. Right. And they're all case studies. They're written by the schools themselves of the journeys they're taking. So I'm looking forward to that one.
Great.
So thank you so much for your time today. It's been such a privilege.
It's been a great pleasure, Rebecca. Thank you for inviting me. And having watched, you know, quite a number of your video casts on YouTube, I can highly recommend them to new teachers as well. So, you know, you're doing a great job. So thanks very much for including me. And of course, I want to recommend your YouTube channel, where you've got lots of short takes of you saying the kinds of things you've said in this interview, but as individual videos. So as this draws to a close, I'll put a couple of end cards on this video linking, well, I'll put 4 on, linking to 2 of yours and 2 of mine, so people can follow those links and easily find both channels. And if they'd like to subscribe to both channels, that would be awesome. And we'd hope to see you again. Yeah, great. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, bye-bye.